Manchester United's interest in Joshua Zirkzee, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's future, and Chelsea want a forward too. You can see the theme. It's about strikers. And today I'm joined by JJ Bull and Jon Mackenzie to talk about strikers and transfers. As it was last week, gang, this show today is based on the reporting that has been published in the Athletic's DealSheet, which includes the work of David Ornstein and many more fine journalists. And I think it's very important to start by saying what it says at the beginning of the DealSheet article. It says, the information found within this article has been gathered according to the Athletic's sourcing guidelines, and less stated our reporters have spoken to more than one person briefed on each deal. So for our purposes, whether or not the deals that we're discussing today actually happen, they are being discussed. That is true. We only concern ourselves with the truth. And also, with that said, a second caveat. I believe the 30th of June is the PSR deadline for the Premier League. We're going to come back and touch on that shortly with Jon, but it explains why you might see a little bit more frenetic transfer movings and dealings this week. So something very exciting for us all to look forward to. But before all of that, JJ Bull, let's begin with Joshua Zirkzee. The Athletic has reported that United remain in talks with his representatives and that the club's interest is advanced. Why would you say that's the case?
It was because Ornstein said so.
Yeah, that's why, yeah.
Well, it's because it is advanced, according to the reporting in the deal sheet. Now, the reason they might want Zirkzee, if you were to ask me that, is that...
That's what I meant.
Yes, well, here we go. So, United need more than one striker. They only have Rasmus Højlund, who we know did okay last season. He only scored 10 goals in 30 games, 25 starts. It's an XG of 7.5, which isn't amazing. But clearly what they need is someone, so he doesn't have to play every single game, because United play a lot of games usually. So one of the things you could do here is buy someone who's just like Rasmus Højlund. You could leave them on the bench, but they're a slightly worse player, and that makes your team worse when you put them on. Or you go for someone different who offers something completely different to what Højlund does. And that is what Zirkzee does. Now, Højlund stylistically, as we know, likes to run in behind, plays as the shoulder of the last man, so you can play passes in behind for him to run onto. You also play in the counter-attack, so when the team pushes up, you've got the use of like Bruno Fernandes and his lovely through balls to try and get him in behind, and United do this because they play in transition quite a lot. So Højlund tends to try and run in behind. This pushes the backline back of the opposition, and so that then creates space in behind for someone like Fernandes or whoever's running in behind to come and play. So you get stylistic things from Højlund that does that, and he also gets in the box to try and score, but very advanced striker, that's what he is. Zirkzee is very much the opposite. So where Højlund touches the ball, or last season touched the ball an average of 25.5 times per 90, Zirkzee touched the ball for Bologna in Serie A 44.8 times, which is more times. It's because he's a very different kind of player. Højlund's a 9, Zirkzee is more of a 9.5 or a 10, I would say. So if Zirkzee's a central striker, what he'd do rather than play off the shoulder of the last man is he drops all the time into these positions. He goes here, he goes here, he goes wide as well, and he likes to drop in to receive it in space.
He's a Totti.
I don't know, did Totti do that? I don't remember him doing that.
I think Totti was the first false 9. I mean, Nandor Hidaguti was the first false 9, but he was the first modern false 9.
Good knowledge though, Joe.
That is good knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
I know some things.
So Zirkzee is that guy, and he can drop into these positions to help link the play and drive United forward if he does. Does it for Bologna quite a lot. And then at Bologna, he often has someone like Lewis Ferguson next to him telling him where to go and press and do all the actual stuff he needs to do off the ball. But Zirkzee is more of a player who gets on the ball and then dribbles. So another thing he does that someone like Højlund doesn't is he gets the ball and likes to go past players. If you're building him in a video game, you put his dribbling high and his flair very high. He likes to do tricks.
Like me on fireworks night.
That's exactly right, yes.
Dribbling and flares.
Or during your career in the circus. But there's somewhere else there won't be fireworks, and that's in front of goal, because Zirkzee doesn't really score that much. In fact, he's quite frustrating at times to watch. So we said Højlund's XG was 7.5. Last season for Bologna, he was, well, in fact, just over the last 2 seasons, he's only scored 13 goals in 2 seasons. And he is effectively a central forward. Now, he's in the Netherlands team at Euro 2024, but he's on the bench. I don't think he's even played yet. And it's probably because of stylistic things, but he's not really this goal-scoring striker. He gives you something different.
Yeah.
And I guess what you could look at is where else he could play or how you fit him into the system. And me and Jon were talking about this yesterday. The problem probably is where Bruno Fernandes fits in with Zirkzee, because of the kind of player he is.
Yeah, I think if you bring in a player like Zirkzee, you have the option of doing some of the sort of more Roberto De Zerbi ideas with artificial transition, which we've talked about a lot on these shows. But the idea being that if Manchester United are going to rely on transition, they're going to constantly be trying to find balls in behind. We talked about how Højlund it fits into that kind of system. The problem is sometimes you'll come up against a team who's just going to sit deep, not allow you any of that space, and then you're trying to break down a low block with players who are probably not best suited to doing that. So one of the benefits you get from Zirkzee is that he is going to help you try and create space in some ways, right? So he's going if he drops deep, the idea is that you pull opposition centre backs forward, create that space in behind, and you can either have your wide players coming in around the sides, or you can have something we saw actually quite a lot with Erik ten Hag's Ajax team, right? Which is when they were playing in the Champions League in that first iteration, where they got to almost got to the final, I should say. They were playing with Dusan Tadic as a false nine. He would drop off, and they had Donny van der Beek in behind, who could then box crash behind as well. So you can see why this does give, in theory, Manchester United a little bit more tactical flexibility. But as you say, JJ, the issue with this is that in order to do that, you do need to have the sort of profiles where that's going to benefit you. Yeah. If you're wanting a box crasher behind Zirkzee, it's probably not Fernandes. If you don't play him, then you move him out wide. You're taking one of Rashford or Garnacho off probably, and then you've got to find a profile of player who can play almost as the striker.
So they've got McTominay. So you could bring Scott McTominay in as your box crasher and also helping maybe lead a press. I don't think I've really seen him do that too well that much.
But again, you could play Zirkzee as a 10, as you've already mentioned, and have Højlund ahead of him too. But the problem for me is that like the main player in the team last season was Fernandes, and he likes to play from these central spaces. He does drift out. He can play out wide. But I suppose the question is like, what benefit are you getting by reshuffling some of your best players around? Garnacho, again, one of the best players, and then you're sort of having to force him to play on one side rather than the other. So I suppose this does raise sort of like profile fit questions.
And also the way like he played under Thiago Motta at Bologna, like it's lots and lots of passes, lots of midfield congestion. It's basically the opposite of what Ten Hag does, which is try and create transitions and get the ball into space. So you could play them alongside each other, and that is an option. And I think that's one of the reasons why you get a different profile of forward. I mean, you could, like, there are options. So see this is the team they're left with. You could play something like this. This is all just speculative, but you could have, because Dalot's been very good going forward, has been a winger in the past, so you could have him giving you width on the right, Højlund playing through the centre, you've got Zirkzee dropping into positions behind, Fernandes and Menu and Mount can all sort of form round here, so you've got your sort of shape.
Shaw's played left centre-back before as well.
Exactly, so you can create this sort of three as well. I mean, this is just, there's loads of things you can do, and you could play someone that's not Mount and start copying Guardiola and play a 3-2-4-1, something like that.
Crucially also, and I think it's worth saying at this point, as we speak, if this move was to go forward, that conversations between the two clubs would still need to take place. But there is a €40 million release clause, as you mentioned. Presumably that's one of the main reasons that this player is of interest.
I think it's probably the main reason.
There's a cap on how much that this could cost.
He's kind of clear because he's still young, he's like 23, so there's room to improve, so there's big resale value. So you buy someone like that, you can still sell them, even though he will have played for Man United after that point. So you've got that as a thing. He offers you something different. He would work in the Premier League. I think people would find him quite frustrating because he'll try and dribble a lot and he'll lose the ball in the Premier League quite a lot. But it's fun to watch, so I don't mind that. But that release clause means that you can get him for a reasonable value for what he is. If you think of some of the players that go for 60, 70 million pounds who aren't even that useful, and he'd be, what, 40 million euros is about 32.5 million pounds. Yeah. This makes sense financially. It does give them a decent young player, and their squad is quite small. I mean, there's loads of players here, but they need forwards, so they need people in the team that's going to give them something different going forward.
It's maybe worth saying as well that we just talked about how Højlund didn't have a huge amount of XG last season. That's in part a tactical issue, right? He's a player that you want to have as a central striker running in behind more XG, and so maybe bringing in Zirkzee, yes, okay, he's not going to be the player who then is going to put up 20 goals a season. But if he actually allows Højlund to be the player who does get 20 goals a season, then again you're adding value in that way. But as we said before, the big question is like, how do you reposition everyone on the field in such a way as to be getting the best out of everyone involved? Okay,
well that's Zirkzee. Let's talk about Dominic Calvert-Lewin now, John, who David Ornstein reported in the deal sheet. Newcastle had been in talks with Everton about a proposed deal, but that proposed deal, as we're speaking, is now in doubt. Just sticking with the player for a second though, John. It's an interesting, wasn't it? Can you see why recruitment departments of other Premier League teams would be interested in Calvert? Like, what's the special thing here about him?
Yeah, we've just talked about Zirkzee, who Manchester United are trying to find value by buying him early in his career, and then that value increasing just on the basis of the fact that he improves.
Young,
yeah. Whereas this is an example, I think, of a player who is maybe a little bit slept on. He's had various things in his career which have maybe devalued him in the market, but 2 or 3 years ago, I think we were talking about Calvert-Lewin as maybe a striker who would go on to be, 80, 90 million pound striker around about this time. Now, obviously that hasn't happened, but what you have here is a player who maybe hasn't hit his potential. And the big question is whether or not you can find value by bringing him in at a lower cost and then getting him back on track to where he was.
Middle.
Yes, it's rare to get a 27-year-old player who was linked with being like England's main forward for a long time, available even.
Potentially undervalued.
Yes.
Although in this case it seems not.
Yeah, and he has a really nice profile. That's why he was so highly valued 3 or 4 seasons ago. He has a really nice physical profile. He's a mobile player. He's got really nice movement in the box, so he can generate really good chances through his movement as well. And I think he has quite a nice age curve as well. I mean, you could make the argument that there's a similarity in profile to someone like Olivier Giroud, similar kind of player. And obviously, Olivier Giroud is still playing well into his 30s, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of bringing in Dominic Calvert-Lewin at 27 years old is that you could, in theory, get a lot more out of him from his career.
I've always thought I have a terrific age curve, The older I get, the more I'm curved.
I don't know, what do you think, JJ? Would you have expected Dominic Calvert-Lewin to be like a really high-value striker right now on the basis of his early career?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Everton often have to play against the other team, as all teams do, but what I mean, they're defensive, right? So he might have fewer touches than players at big clubs. But he still posted okay XG. I don't think it was ever amazing. So that's one of the things with Calvert-Lewin is that he was never really... He has like one season where he was quite decent, but he also tends to score under his XG, if I'm not mistaken.
Funny you should mention that. I've got a graphic which shows that, yeah. This is just a graphic which shows how much above or below his expected goals he is performing. So this doesn't talk about like the level of XG he's getting season on season. It's just whether or not he's performed above or below the level that he's been putting up.
And John, red is bad.
Red is bad, yeah. So that means that he's performing under the level of what you would expect him to do against his XG. And then you've got this nice blue period here in 2021, which is when Ancelotti was there. He basically has a 6-month period where he just scores a lot of goals.
That's the Dominic Calvert-Lewin. That's the player I think he really is, underneath the injuries, underneath the lack of form. Maybe that's stupid, but...
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing here is that if you take this season and you compare it to last season, the difference between those 2 seasons is that across 21 to 23, he has a series of hamstring injuries, which obviously hold him back. And then in 22-23 season, he has 3 hamstring injuries, which obviously curtail his ability. You can see he barely played any games in that season off the back of it. But actually, these 2 seasons, when compared together, the return season after the injuries that he's had, in terms of the XG per 90 that he's putting up, it's actually pretty much bang on the same. So it's around 0.5 XG per 90 that he's putting up in the season under Ancelotti. The difference is that you can see he's actually performing against that XG much better in that first season. So he actually hits around the same number of goals. So he's around 0.5 goals per 90 against an XG of 0.5, which is what you want, right?
Yeah.
Same thing is happening last season. He's putting up 0.5 XG per 90 for Dyche's Everton, but the difference is that he's just chronically underperforming, in fact, to the tune of about 50%. So I've actually got his shot map from last season. As you can see, he puts up around 11.4 XG, but only scores around 5 goals. So, he's well under half what you would expect him to do. And you can see there are the big chances here that he is missing. We could talk about why that is the case and whether or not his performance in front of goal has been affected by his injuries. That's certainly something that I think a recruitment department would want to think about. But actually, I think the more interesting question with Calvert-Lewin is why is he so undervalued right now? Because if we look at his injury history, so this is the 22-23 season where I talk about he gets this series of hamstring injuries. So you can see those 3 hamstring injuries through the season. You can see he's had one each season before that as well. So you can look at this injury history and think, this is a guy who's going to have hamstring problems. But actually, if we go to last season and look at what his injury history was then, he had fitness issues at the beginning of the season, which you might expect if you barely played the previous season because of hamstring issues.
But they got him a new mattress.
They got a new mattress and a new car, and they were assessing his sleeping patterns and stuff like that. So they are trying to overcome some of this stuff. But he gets a broken cheekbone, which is obviously bad luck. You can't do anything about that. But beyond that, he actually plays about 24 90s across last season, which is, I think, the 3rd amount of minutes he's played for Everton. So he was playing minutes. He was available. The big question, I think, then is, does that mean that he's not going to have these recurring hamstring issues going forward? And again, we're talking about finding value in the market, right? So you look at this profile and you think, okay, this is a player who has injury history. Would we pay 70 million, 80 million for a player like this? Obviously not. But, and this is where the PSR stuff comes in, if there's a context where you can actually get the player cheaper, then you could make the argument, well, and Newcastle were the team that were linked with him. Newcastle want a backup striker. They bring in someone like Calvert-Lewin, who was previously thought to be a 70, 80 million pound striker, fallen on hard times, has had a decent chunk of minutes last season. Your thinking is, okay, we bring him in 30, 40 million, and if we play him 20, we get 24, 90s worth of minutes out of him. It's a pretty good return on investment for that amount of money. And the hope is then that you can actually, if things go to plan, you can maybe get him back towards the level that he was before, and suddenly you've bought one of the best strikers in the market 3 years ago for probably about half the value of what the club want from him now. So that's why Dominic Calvert-Lewin is turning clubs' heads at the moment, because of the PSR situation, making a lot of recruitment departments thinking maybe there's some value to be found here.
Yeah, although it's worth saying the thing with Everton is that whilst it was thought earlier in the window that their profitability, sustainability hole would be bigger, aka they'd need to sell more players in order to fill that. It's actually smaller than people thought. So I think the noise coming from the club is that they don't need to sell Calvert-Lewin in order to fix that.
But there's also Calvert-Lewin, like he's 27. This would be like potentially his last big contract, and he'd want like 5 years probably minimum on his deal for whatever he signs for. He also wouldn't want to sign for someone as a backup striker. He want to push for that the first choice place. But like clubs would then don't want to spend that much money on not even the transfer fee, but the wages, knowing that they might miss him for a lot of the season anyway. So it's really hard to go for that. Equally, he doesn't want to make a decision where he then is stuck as a reserve striker, battling against someone like Alexander Isak, who's one of the best young strikers in the world. Yeah. So you don't want to get stuck with that sort of thing as well.
I'd like to see him do well. I really loved watching him in that Carlo Ancelotti season. That first 6 months when he was top scorer for a few months. He was electric. He was so good. I'd love him to get back to wherever that may be. Everton, Newcastle, I don't care. I just want him to be good. Let's move on to Chelsea now then, because there's plenty to talk about with Chelsea there, John and JJ, isn't it? Now, let me tell you, not that you don't already know, Chelsea's plan was, I'll tell you, Chelsea's plan was always to buy a striker, according to the deal sheet, because they want a competition for Nicholas Jackson. Understandable, of course. But the club now see that aim as being a little bit less specific. So Chelsea are targeting one or two attacking players rather than committing to a central striker, JJ.
Well, I think Chelsea are trying to just basically build a super team of players who are under the age of 23. So they all hit peak at exactly the same time. So they're linked with a bunch of players. I don't know.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Well, not for them because they like those.
Sure.
So there's, do you want me to tell you who they've been linked with?
I can tee you up. I can say that an offer of €32.5 million plus add-ons was made for Atletico Madrid forward Samu Amarodian. 20 years old. It was rejected, and yes. I should also say that they are investigating other targets too. But what do you think of Amarodian?
Well, it's interesting that looking at Amarodian, because if you watch the goals that he scored for Alaves, they're almost identical to the ones that Nicholas Jackson scored for Chelsea. Similar in profile, those two players. Amarodian, if you look at him on things like FBref, he comes out looking quite similar in style to players like Alvaro Morata and like Joselu. So players who are in the box at the right time to try and score. Now he's playing for Alaves, who finished mid-table and scored, I think, 36 goals all season in the league.
Was he on loan there?
Yeah, he was on loan there. So to score anything is quite good. Yeah, sure. Especially as a 20-year-old and you've just gone there. It's his first season there.
Yeah.
So he's a decent player, but again, high potential. So they can possibly get him out of Atletico Madrid for a decent enough fee, and he would then offer direct competition for Jackson in that team. And you'd also have high resale value, and they're just building that squad going forward. So you want someone, because they've got currently Chelsea have Nicholas Jackson, and they've got where's he going? Christopher Nkunku, everyone seems to have forgotten about, who's a very, very good player.
Yeah, injured for a long time, wasn't he? Well, another player that fits your list here is Marc Guiu, the 18-year-old striker, Barcelona, €6 million release clause. I wonder why they're interested there.
I think it might be the release clause. Guiu came off the bench for Barcelona. Barcelona had horrible injury problems last season, as you may remember, and I think he controlled the ball with his first touch and finished with his second. I think might be his third, but basically everyone got very excited. There's a lot of the Tony Watts about it.
Tony Wen, more like.
However, Marc Guiu is probably a much better player and will have a strong career going forward. But he's a La Masia graduate, €6 million. You buy him now, you ship him out. You flip him for like £15 million a couple of seasons. Yeah.
Perfect.
So I think that's business.
Here's a quote from the deal sheet, JJ.
Please
you
tell
ready?
me. Yeah.
There are 5 to 7 players under consideration for the attacking positions. Lille's Jonathan David is admired, as reported by The Athletic, of course. John Duran is still on the wish list, although interest there cooled.
Yes. Do you like those players, John?
They're both called John.
Stamp
Yeah.
of approval. That's true.
The Jonathan David is like 24 years old. He posted decent XG numbers in League and scored a lot of goals as well. John Duran is a high potential player, basically. So,
But the key with all of these was that Chelsea want to provide competition for Jackson. I mean, I'm curious about Jackson because I've heard a lot that Chelsea, as a team, underperformed their XG. He's always going on about the underlying numbers, saying, "Oh, they would have done better." Whatever.
yes, they're important.
What about Jackson specifically? Can you see him as the future star of this team that you're talking about that all peak at the same time?
Well, here's the thing with Nicholas Jackson. So he scored more goals last season than Didier Drogba did in two of his first seasons at Chelsea, which sounds good, right?
It does sound good.
It does sound good, yeah. So Jackson. So I think any young player going to a new league, a new country, and a new team is very difficult. Especially he's 23, Jackson now.
Sure.
So I think you give him a bit of time to adapt. First half of the season he struggled, missed some really big chances. Obviously not ideal for him. So that's not good. But by the end of the season, he posted 18.6 non-penalty expected goals. Well, I did a lovely search on StatHead in the big database thing over the last 10 years in the top 5 European leagues, just to see what you could really expect of a good striker. What's a good non-penalty XG? To find out.
What is it?
Well, as you'll see, Robert Lewandowski, so you can see Bayern Munich, it turns out if you play for Bayern Munich, you tend to be a really good striker. So almost as if it's slightly easier. But you've got Lewandowski, Harry Kane, Mbappe, Messi, Haaland, Salah, Suarez, like some of the best players you've ever seen.
The thing that links those players is that they're very, very good.
They're all very, very good, posting very high non-penalty XG. So sometimes what you'll get is a freak season where one player just has an amazing season. Like, I wouldn't call it a freak, but when Calvert-Lewin was on Ancelotti, right? So he posted decent numbers.
Sure.
So he played well.
Yeah.
But look down at the bottom, you've got Timo Werner. All of a sudden had 18.9 non-penalty XG, scored way over it as well. Some players do that. So another way you can measure them, apart from how many non-penalty XG goals they post, is how many goals they actually score off of it. If they are over that means that if you do it consistently, you're consistently over your XG, you can pretty much tell they're a good player. Harry Kane, Haaland, everyone, they all do that. They always score over their XG. If they have one season where they do really well, like Andre Silva, I think you said he's had a really decent season.
It was a great season that season for Eintracht Frankfurt, but then hasn't reproduced that anywhere else.
That's right. So you sort of say, oh, well, do we buy him based on that one-off season? Now, Nicholas Jackson, over the last 10 years, his 18.6 non-penalty XG is the 30th best of any player in the last 10 years.
And that's his first Chelsea season.
That's his first Chelsea season. So this is all like players individually from their seasons.
And his first season as a full striker as well, correct?
And they were
before he was playing.
And they were useless for most of the season as well. So like, imagine trying to adapt to that as well. It must be really hard. But like, you see things with your eyes. So like, it looks like he's making loads of errors. So it looks worse. He did miss big chances, and it wasn't always great with first touch and dialogue with the midfield. But what you don't want to do, I would say, is put someone into the team who's then going to derail his development, because you have to keep playing to get the confidence and the chemistry of your teammates to turn into the big striker.
I think the interesting thing here is that we're not mentioning the fact that Chelsea have had a managerial change.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I think Nicholas Jackson put up decent XG in a team that was managed by Pochettino, and they were just a very, very direct team. So like, how many times did we see them trying to find the Nicholas Jackson with a through ball from like Madueke or Sterling? Yeah. There's the game against Spurs where Spurs played that high line, and it just felt like every attack sort of went down the line and they tried to find Jackson in the middle, and yes, he missed a couple, but he ended up getting a hat-trick in that game, I think. Very direct style of play, and obviously Jackson really suits that style of play because he's a very good in-behind runner. They've now signed Enzo Maresca, who is more of the Pep Guardiola school of management, which is about patient, sustainable ball progression, squeezing teams into low blocks and then trying to break those low blocks down a lot of the time. So I guess I wonder, one, how useful Jackson is going to be in that kind of system, or whether or not he will put up a lower XG total next season off the back of the fact that the tactics change. But two, whether or not this forward search then is being done off the back of the fact that Chelsea will be looking for a kind of profile that they think is going to work better in those scenarios where it is about breaking down low blocks a little bit more. They do have Christopher Nkunku, but it does sound as though they're also looking for maybe a bit more of a target man striker from some of the searches that they're talking about. So yeah, kind of interested to see how that plays out, whether or not that shift of tactical approach is actually going to reduce Nicholas Jackson's quality in terms of the amount of XG he's putting up.
You can maybe compare it a little bit to Leicester last season because Vardy was there. I didn't watch enough of them to possibly know, but he scored 18 in 18, 19, 20 games, something like that. And similarly, well, I'd say he probably has fewer touches than Jackson does on the ball. He doesn't really want any dialogue in midfield. He just plays in behind. And Leicester were very good for the start of that season. So it could be that that's what it works. But that's a good example of where it might be that he finds ways to get the most out of Jackson.
Okay.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.